going to go through what is exactly Reg A and how is it different from crowdfunding and how is it different from Title II and private placements and why should I care? And if I'm a company looking to raise money, why would I choose a Reg A deal versus another? We may have a shortage of chairs, so I can just stand.
Oh, that might help a little. Yeah. You've got the whole court advantage.
The table is angled.
Yeah, how's that? That help?
So I'm Brian Korn. Welcome to Pepper Hamilton. Thanks for joining us. After this program, I hope you join us out in the front area where we will have a cocktail reception. But for now, we'll talk about Reg A. All of you might have these slides. They're on the table outside. They're extra copies if you need them. If you want email copies, let me know. There's also a release we did called No Easy A when Reg A came out, talking about what exactly comes with the rules and a comparison chart so that you can decide which alternative is best for you. I'm going to talk for 1 minute just about what we're talking about, and then I'm going to flip it to this great panel we have assembled of crowdfunding luminaries. So we had the beginning. This is the signing of the Jobs Act. There's Congressman McHenry on the right, along with Eric Cantor and others. Just as an overview, the Jobs Act was signed April 5th, 2012. It comprised of 7 different titles. Title I is the IPO on-ramp, so confidential filings, the ability to be exempt from Sarbanes-Oxley compliance if you're an emerging growth company. Reg A plus, raising the limits from $5 million to $50 million. Private placement reforms, the advertised private placements. Title III, which is the equity crowdfunding or the crowdfunding to the public rules. There was a provision asking if decimalization should be increased on tick sizes. So there was a proposal where the SEC could increase trading on tick sizes for emerging growth companies from 5 cents to 9 cents, and prospective issuer outreach. By and large, very successful bill. Title I, the most successful, the IPO on-ramp, because it went into effect immediately, and the SEC was scrambling to say, we're not ready for confidential filings, we're not ready for test the waters, we're not ready for a handful of other things. But after a few days, they got their systems set up and things were moving well. Unfortunately for the private placement rules for Reg A Plus and for public crowdfunding, those were subject to SEC rulemaking, and that's why this holiday season we're going to celebrate the second anniversary of the deadline of Title III. Current Reg A, so those of you who aren't familiar with Reg A, is very seldom used. I have some stats in the memo. I think there were a total of 9 deals in 2012. It is the small offering exemption. You can go out to the public, including non-accredited investors, with a Reg A offering, but you must go to the SEC first with an offering document, which is unlike Title II and unlike Rule 506 Reg D private placements. And you do not have state securities law preemptions. You have to go state to state to ask for permission. And those of you who follow even the peer-to-peer world know that state by state securities regulation is tough to do. Even Lending Club has only gotten approval to sell notes in half the states, so it's not something that is easily granted. The promise of Jobs Act Title IV was that we will now be able to potentially have preemption, which is we will be able to bypass the states. And I think that's what the Congressman was alluding to, this ability to nationalize securities regulation once and for all. And so what do they do in Title IV? And I will, I don't know if you guys can see this, but so this is sort of the current crowdfunding landscape. Includes, rewards-based, accredited investors, and securities to the public. Reg A Plus compared to public crowdfunding compared to Title II, you have this 2-tiered system that the SEC has set up. On the first tier is the old rule, so $5 million max. You can only go to accredited and non-accredited investors. You have to apply for permission first. You have to have an offering circular. You do not need to become a fully public company and register and file public filings after you're finished. Your shares are not going to be restricted following the transaction, and you are not exempt from state law, so you still have to go state to state and ask for permission. A second tier was established called Tier 2. $50 million, you will be exempt from state registration, provided you offer only to qualified investors, which we'll talk about. You will have an annual, quarterly, and current reporting regime, similar to doing a public offering. One of the questions we're going to ask is, why not just go on NASDAQ if you're going to raise $50 million and have to file public reports? Again, your shares are not restricted, which is the main advantage over a private placement under 506, where you are restricted, which means you have to either get a public registration to sell your shares, sell into a market under Rule 144A after a holding period, or do a private-to-private resale, such as a 144A or 4.1.5 in what we call it. So that's essentially the landscape, and I don't want to take too much time discussing sort of the black letter rules, but Doug, what do we see in terms of Title III, and is that something that you think is going to be a viable competitor in this world?
I felt a hell of a lot better before I came to hear the congressperson speak about it. So when even he is retreating a little bit, it would seem, I guess after 2.5 years of spending my life on this, I'm a little more discouraged than I would have liked to have been. But that disappointment in my voice tells you that I think we're at a very bad point in time where the SEC and NASA, to Kim's question, have done a very good job on their counter initiative to frustrate Title III. It is, and I'll say it even though Congressman Henry's not here, who's been a wonderful champion for Title III, and you can hear him even say it, is it's not as if the proposed rules aren't already published. Those proposed rules have been out since October 23rd, and they have been commented on prior to the proposed rules coming out and since. And what's actually surprising to me is even his comments, which is that they may not be economically viable, is not addressing what he started, which is to say that the mandate is between investor protection and capital formation, both of which are addressed in the proposed Title III rules. So pass the proposed rules, and if they're imperfect, it won't work, and then clean it up afterwards. So to me, and really the answer to the question that Gene was asking about how is it possible that they are actually frustrated at the moment, is that you don't have 3 of the 5 commissioners willing to sign on the dotted line that in fact it should move forward, which is what happened with Title II last year. The suggestion I would make for those people who are paying attention is a lot of the complaints that were made about online Title II a year into the exercise have not taken place. So I want NASA, I want the SEC to show us why this doesn't work. It's not a conversation that takes place, but yes, Title III is officially stalled as of this evening, apparently.
And the way,
as if I didn't know that.
Title III was one of the most prescriptive measures, is literally hardwired into the Jobs Act text. So it's kind of
it's hundreds of pages of how to proceed.
Right. It's the longest part of the Jobs Act. So and then the rules, the proposed rules didn't really modify what Congress had laid out. So it's
well, I actually to that point, actually, they did spend a tremendous amount of time, Sara and I in particular, with the staff, and they wrote really intelligent proposed rules. The problems within the statute are in the statute. There's nothing the SEC can do. You do have to go back to Congress. But if you read the rules on the social media and other provisions in there, they spent a lot of time on getting it right, and I think that they did.
Sam, you wrote an article titled Reg A Plus Offerings, a New Era at the SEC, where you discuss SEC preemption. And I guess the premise of this is that Congress gave the SEC the authority to preempt, which allowed the state securities regulators to lobby against that. What are your observations on Reg A Plus?
So let me start with the statute. The statute has certain things in there that are black and white. If you were under the new Reg A Plus and you're on a national exchange, you're automatically blue sky. That's fine. The real battle is in the statute. They created a term called qualified purchaser. If everyone is in the offering, and the Reg A offering is a qualified purchaser, then you're exempt from blue sky. So the big issue for the SEC was, how do we define qualified purchaser? I think what NASA expected, and a lot of people expected, was to be very similar to accredited investor. When the proposed rules came out, I think most people were fairly shocked, at least I was, and I think other people were, because the way they defined qualified investor was not what your background and experience was, or even directly what your net worth was, your income was, but how much you were going to invest in the offering. So anyone basically can be is a qualified purchaser. The only limitations are how much you can invest, which is the 10% of your income or net worth, whichever is greater. That set NASA on a major collision course with the SEC, and that's something that actually started before the proposed rules were published. It's ongoing now. In fact, tomorrow I'm going to be on a panel with the president of NASA in Palm Springs, so I'm going to have hopefully some interesting discussions about that. But that's a very serious issue, and Congressman McHenry pointed out what's at stake is not investor protection, it's protecting the jobs and the power base of the state securities administrators. I mean, Congressman McHenry basically told it like it is. That's what's going on. How that's going to come out, nobody really knows. We don't know if we'll stay with the proposed rules, which is great. Everyone's a qualified purchaser, or whether there'll be some compromise and whether there'll be some modified definition of qualified purchasers. Nobody knows. But the good news is Congressman McHenry, although he's not very sanguine on Title III, did introduce and get out of the House Financial Services Committee 2 bills in May on a party line vote. One was Title IV, to preempt everyone for both Tier 1 and Tier 2 offerings, to get rid of something that people in the room may not know, 12G caps, which basically means you can have an unlimited number of shareholders in a Reg A offering and not have to worry about being a fully reporting company, and also bumping up the limit on Tier 1 rather, which is the $5 million to $10 million, which when you put in preemption becomes viable. So that's what he didn't have time to talk about, but that's a bill that's near and dear to my heart, and I think if we get the right results in 2 weeks in the Senate, Reg A Plus, notwithstanding NASA, is going to take on even a bigger life and a bigger place than it has right now. So.
There was a proposal in the Reg A release on something called the middle tier, or the proposed third tier, which is
Right.
the what I call Tier 1.5.
Right, I actually put in a comment letter on it. I don't know where it came from,
What-
but I
why
put in a comment letter on that.
why a third tier, and what would that accomplish?
Okay. Basically, Tier 1 is pretty much a dead letter because there's no preemption, and right now it's limited to $5 million, but that's not really the issue. The only way you're going to get preemption under the statute as it is now is you need audited financial statements and you need ongoing disclosure. So what I actually suggested in a comment letter to the SEC was to have a sub-tier of Tier 2 where you essentially had lighter disclosure, initial and ongoing, for a Tier 2 company. So there was less of a disclosure burden, but you still had the preemption. I'm hopeful we'll get a bill passed in 2015, which will do away with that. And there's a lot of people, including Congressman McHenry, who would like to see that. So,
Sara, there's a lot of talk about the states and the rise of intrastate crowdfunding and this sort of assertion of states' rights. And many people hadn't even heard from their state securities regulator before a lot of this happened. What can you tell us about the state-only rules, state-only offerings?
So, yeah, there's been a huge amount of fuss, and every single state goes, what's one of those? Yeah, we want one of those. We want to do, there's great capital raising for our companies. But the problem is that intrastate exemption from the securities registration provisions is in 2 tiers. The first thing is you have to comply with the federal level. Then you have to comply with whatever the state rules are. And the exemption at the federal level is, for most states, it's Section 3A11 of the Securities Act, which is interpreted further by Rule 147, and I hope you're keeping notes, because if not, you can go to Crowdcheck's website and we'll explain all of this. But you have to comply with that stuff, and that's the stuff that kills it. The intrastate exemptions are a hyper-local exemption. Because at the federal level, in order to comply with Rule 147, which explains what it means to be within a state, you have to be incorporated or organized in that state. And has anyone ever tried to organize a company in DC? Because that is not a good idea. It took us, we're lawyers, it took us a long, long time to do that. So forget that one for a start. Then 80% of your revenues, 80% of your assets, and 80% of your use of proceeds have got to be in state. So even if you are a bakery and you sell 25% of your pies to the next state, you cannot use it. And then, of course, you've got the issues like liability. Everybody's been talking a lot about the Title III liabilities and focusing on that. The liabilities that apply at the federal level for intrastate offerings, it's exactly the same words and it's exactly the same provisions. Plus, you've got state liability law there too. So there is a burden of proof with respect to not making any misleading statements. So that's a problem for teeny tiny companies. And then the final thing, and now that I've just totally put you off intrastate crowdfunding, right? The final piece is that it's very difficult to publicize it. Because in order to, once you're using the means of interstate commerce, which is the internet or the phones or anything else, you have to, every offer and sale has to be subject to an exemption, which means you can't make offers across states, which means putting it on your website, except behind a filtering firewall. You're not going to be able to use your own website or anybody else's website without that kind of filtering process. And just to put the final cherry on this cupcake, which can only be sold locally, is in the end, if you end up with more than 500 shareholders, you're going to have to go to the SEC and register anyway, which is a huge, huge pain for a tiny company.
Or
So
wait
it's
for
really-
Title III.
Well, yeah,
Yeah,
wait for the representative to do the 12G thing. So
No,
it's really not an option unless you are a yoga studio and you're only selling to 400 of your very best friends, or you are a cupcake bakery with operations in your state only. I mean, it's a lovely idea, and now every single state's going, yeah, we want one of those too, but really,
Right.
it's...
Breweries. Oh,
Yes,
it's
And the
big
new-
breweries.
the new
what's the thing
guidance.
about breweries? Breweries, beer companies are like the pioneers of securities law. I can write the history of securities law.
Exactly.
Like the Pabst buy a beer company people.
Yeah, yeah.
With beer.
Sarah,
With beer.
I thought that there was clarification from the SEC about that general solicitation.
It does-
To be more common sense.
They dug in their heels.
No, it's not.
Yeah.
You know, people thought that the initial one was terrible, and then the interpretation was better. It's exactly the same
It's the
thing.
same thing.
Which is whether you use someone else's website or your own website. If you're doing interstate communications, that's going to fall foul of the rules. You have to be intrastate, which means a firewall, someone else's site or your own.
And what's interesting about the guidance that came out recently is that most people thought, well, all right, our servers in New Jersey or our servers in somewhere else, but it doesn't matter because our offerings only being made to people in New York. The SEC came out with guidance that said you can only make an offer to people in your state. You have to have prominent disclosure that the offer is only being made to people in that state. You have to do checks on zip codes and other items to ensure that people are in that state. And the real kicker is you have to program your servers so that any IP address originating from a different state will be rejected on your platform. And despite the SEC's notion that this is easy to do, it actually isn't that easy. And New Jersey's wrestling with this right now with the gaming rules and people needing to be in New Jersey to bet. And then I went down to some of my clients' offices in Tribeca, and they said, "Oh, there's an app that you can actually that tells a computer that you're in New Jersey, and I can do it from right here." So it's all very quick.
Yeah.
I want to get to Lou. So is all well in Title II land? I mean, if you look at this chart, the check marks are sort of your tail of the tape in terms of what would be the least restrictive or easiest or less costly way of proceeding, and unlimited to accreds, no PPM. It seems like sort of a panacea, but what?
Well, your timing is good because one of my clients, which is called Bank, BANQ, which Doug is aware of, which was a platform set up to do specifically 506Cs, Reg A pluses if they get initiated, and a number of other things, just completed their first 506C, and they completed it successfully. And I would say that, it's a positive change. I wouldn't say that it's a panacea. It's positive in that we were able to use the web-based platform, and it wasn't a locked out, you had to have a password to get into platform, to disseminate much more information than people would have normally been able to see. We were able to put a data room up. We were able to put not just we did use a PPM. We were able to put up not just the PPM, but speeches from the CEO, testimonials. So the information going out, that was much easier, much less constrictive now that we can do general solicitation and advertising. I would say that where it's kind of still stuck in the old 506 mode was that you still had to have brokers getting on the phone with clients and talking them through the offering terms. So it wasn't as seamless on the digital side as we would eventually like it to be. And I think that's a matter of sort of ongoing adoption. I don't think that's a flaw in the rule. I think that's just as we progress as citizens who are getting used to, we're used to now Amazon doing one-click orders, but I don't think people are ready yet to do thousands of dollars in a 506C and just click ACH my account. Although the site is set up to do that. The other place where I think you can imagine that we had a little bit of a hold up was just that you need to verify the accredited status of everybody who comes in. So that process. My client is a broker-dealer, so they're able to, people are a little more comfortable sending them tax returns, but what we found is for the most part, investors were getting those verification letters from counsel or from accountants. But even so, that's a new process for investors, and that did sort of put a little bit of grit into the gears there. But all in all, it went well. I mean, I don't know that it's going to be the panacea that everyone hopes it is. I personally think that if Title IV is implemented the way everyone wants to see it implemented, you'll see a drop in the amount of 506Cs. In doing my homework for this presentation, I read the same reports that you read about how the Reg A has been declining since adoption, basically year over year, and 506 has been going up. And I think the real reason is the preemption issue, the covered security issue. So I think that if Reg A does come in, that will balance it out a little bit, particularly because you'll be able to get a free trading security out of it.
Do we know when, so the unfinished business of Title II was the proposals to file a Form D 15 days before and 15 after. And if you miss that filing, you're out of Reg D for a year, which is a huge problem, for example, in the investment fund or hedge fund world. So a lot of people thought, well, that's going to be too punitive. Do we know where the SEC is on that and when they're going to?
My understanding is that it's been dropped.
No. Well, the commissioners who voted on Title II are no longer the commissioners in place today necessarily. So while those proposed rules didn't go forward, they could come forward at some point. Haven't heard any back to that.
Right, because it's very hard. I mean, in the banking world where I used to work, we sometimes would have to reverse engineer a private placement when we realized that something happened that tripped up. It would be very hard to do that once they impose a rule that you actually have to file a form 15 days ahead of time, because obviously you can't go back in time and do that. Sam?
Yeah, I think just from some public statements that the chair of the SEC has made, that proposed rule is still alive. I don't know if that's just lip service to NASA, who wants it. I think it's back burner. I think there'll be something eventually that comes through that's very watered down, just as to throw a bone to NASA. But nothing that's going to really affect anyone's lives. I think it violates the Regulatory Flexibility Act. I put in a comment letter on that, so did Congressman McHenry, the Office of Advocacy at the SEC, at the SBA rather, and I think it clearly violates what Congress was trying to accomplish in Title II. So I don't think much is going to happen. Nothing with any tension.
Right.
It's really difficult for the SEC to say in an adopting release. We got 300 and however many comments. 95% of them were against this proposal, but we're going over ahead. This is a really difficult regulatory
Right.
lift. So I think
Yeah,
Sam's right. Something watered down maybe in the future, but not front burner.
And when do we think, when do we think we're going to get the Reg A rules, just turning to Reg A for the last part? Anybody care to hazard a guess?
I've lost too many bets at this stage.
Sam?
I just spoke to somebody on the phone today, speaking to Anthony Barone at the SEC and talking about getting something on Reg A Plus on the agenda, and he seemed to indicate, well, it's so close to being adopted that it's really not appropriate for the forum. Don't quote me on this.
Right.
But I think it's this year. I think it's very close. I know that the smart money was saying Title III would come out before Title IV, but now I'm starting to think it's not going to be that way. I mean, I'm starting to think Title IV very
And
soon.
They both have significant hurdles to get over, given NASA's position.
Yes. But I think we may have a chairperson that's waiting to see how the vote goes in Washington in 2 weeks.
One last question before we open it up.
That's-
Trading liquidity. So people say, all right, I can do a $20 million offering. Is that going to be in a listed format? Can it be listed or unlisted? What sorts of restriction would be in place on trading a Reg A plus security?
Well, I think the issues you're going to have are the same issues you're having with penny stocks now. You know, what we're seeing, particularly with the broker-dealers that we work with and small issuers that we work with, is that since FINRA put out 0905 a couple of years ago, it's much harder to deposit what are either certificated stocks or small price stocks, you know, under $5. So I think that the real thing that we need to focus on is how we get firms to accept those securities, how those securities can be put into the digital system. And that's one of the things we've been working on with our client bank, is that just having a seamless integration. So if you do a Reg A Plus or you do a 506C, everything is done digitally, so that we have a complete order trail of, you know, everything from the subscription documents to the payments. It's all online, and everything's already in the clearing firm. Once you close on the transaction, it's not like the old days where you used to send your subscription agreement in, get a subscription agreement countersigned back from the company, 2 weeks later get your certificates, then wait if they're restricted for 6 months or a year, bring them to your broker, try to deposit them. I think the future is everything being in book entry electronic form, and if you do that, I think you'll greatly increase the liquidity. I think that's almost a bigger hurdle than some of the secondary trading regulations. It's just the nuts and bolts logistics of getting stock deposited these days. It's almost impossible for some small companies.
All right, we have time for 2 or 3 quick questions. Yes?
I got one question. Sarah, we had talked in the past about if we're doing crowdfunding, you need a crowd. And if you've got 500 to 2,000 shareholders, all of a sudden you got to do an S1. But we had talked about a book entry and how you can have it as one shareholder can book entry.
Yeah, that gets pretty complicated. Just to give a bit of background here, I mean, there is a point at which if you end up with a certain number of shareholders, which is 2,000 overall or more than 500 non-accredited, then you have to go and register with the SEC and do all of the stuff that a registered company has to do, which is horrendous for a small company. Crowdfunding securities are exempted from that. So you can have 6 trillion crowdfunding investors, and you won't have to register with the SEC.
Title III.
Title III,
Yeah.
right.
How about
Yeah,
4?
but that's one of the things that I know some folks are lobbying the representative especially to say, if we are going to have a vibrant Reg A market post Reg A, then you're going to have something similar. That's probably going to be a legislative fix. I mean, there's several places where legislative fix would be very, very useful in Jobs Act 2.0, and I know folks are talking to the representative about that.
I mean, one thing we really don't know is whether there will be any kind of issue at the White House. I mean, you think the barriers to resistance in the Senate would be down with the changeover, but I'm not sure that there's the focus given everything else going on. Okay, we have time for one more question, Georgia.
So one of the hot topics right now is the proposed changes to the definition of accredited investor. I'd like to know the panel's thoughts, feelings.
Back burner. We're not going to see it for the next couple of years. I'll put money on that one, but remember, I've lost every bet for the last 2 years.
Anyone else, credit investors?
After 2 years, I just follow whatever Sarah says.
I'm not
And
going
I'm
to bet
always
against.
wrong.
Yeah, I'm not going to bet against Sarah.
Okay,
I'm still like the-
we are then now going to move on to the 6 o'clock panel, which is attracting the crowd, marketing innovations for Reg A Plus. other small cap offerings. I'd like to thank our panelists for their time. Save your questions. We'll be around later afterwards for drinks, and you can obviously talk about whatever you want.